Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to Drak Vlogs for Luke Cage. We're down to the final 4 episodes, and here is the vlog for episodes 10 and 11. And man, what we've been building up to has been amazing to watch. Especially, so we just to bring things up to speed. First of all, spoiler warning. If you have not watched Luke Cage and don't want to be spoiled, then here's the time for you to cut off, but I've been leaving you cutoff times for every video, so just keep that in mind. Where we last left things off, things were heating up really big. We had Luke Cage getting shot with a bullet from alien metal called a Judas bullet, and eventually him having to go all the way out to the former doctor, or not doctor, but the former scientist of the prison that that Luke was at. I want to say Carl Lucas, but no, where Luke was at. In order to get the bullet fragments out of his system, they had to literally dunk him in acid to weaken his skin so that they could pull them out. Ugh. But in the meantime, we also had stuff going on in Harlem, where Diamondback was basically taking over for all of Cottonmouth's territory, where Mariah Dillard wanted out. Diamondback said, nope, you are as in as ever. And in turn said, how are we going to handle this, Luke Cage, or how are we going to handle this problem? And they both just come to the solution that they need to pin all of the illegal activities, including Cottonmouth's murder, all of the stuff that's going on, to Luke Cage. And then at that point, they can run their operation, and everybody will be so pissed off at Luke that they won't even care about what Cottonmouth was doing on the side, kind of thing. And that's kind of where we start up these episodes. So we go back to the procedure with Luke, and they were able to pull the shrapnel out of at least. Here's the thing: they only showed pulling it out of one bullet hole, so we don't know if they hit the other one, but we're guessing that they did. And he is recovering at that point, and they actually figured out the problem. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't have to erode his skin. They just needed to raise the temperature a little bit, or not a little bit, a lot, to be able to get in there. So they fix things up, and he's actually recovering from most of episode 10. He's recovering from the bullet wounds, as well as now that we've met the scientist and found out what he was doing at the prison. It's also like questions of, but Riva also knew what was going on. And so it's like, who is Riva? What was Riva doing at the prison, et cetera, et cetera. But before we get more in depth into that, the New York build-up story is happening throughout most of it. One of which was we find out that Diamondback has a new toy, which basically gives him, it's a device that allows him super strength. I'm guessing from a lot of the illegal tech in this series is from Justin Hammer, so I'm guessing this is also from Hammer Industries, but it literally almost seems like it could have come from Stark Industries as well. It's a glove that allows super strength, roughly. And so in order to get to get Harlem against Luke, Diamondback actually goes out in an outfit similar to Luke, but with a backpack, finds a local beat cop, and punches him about 20 feet away from him, in effect killing him. So at that point, but at the same time screaming while he's running away, I'm Luke Cage! I'm Luke Cage! And that way everybody thinks it's Luke Cage that did it, instead, because it's super strength, and it's a guy in a black hoodie claiming to be Luke Cage. So at that point, this is just to inflame the neighborhood against Luke, and also get the NYPD against him. Because right after that, again, this is a cop being murdered. The police department goes nuts. Aside from like Detective Knight and the chief of the precinct that we've been following, everybody goes nuts. So much so that we actually have, which I actually thought was a bad move by the series standard, but they decided to go with it anyway. They're basically arresting everybody they could possibly think of, including just rough passersby. Roughly anybody who's speaking positively of Luke Cage. So much so they actually bring in a young high school kid, black kid. I have no problem saying that. This is where it's going to get controversial, people. They bring him in. This is a good kid. He's on the chess club. He's a smart kid. He's living his life the way that he should be living it. And the cops bring him in because he speaks positively about Luke Cage. Well, it just so happens that the person interrogating him was the former partner of the beat cop that died. Gee, it's almost like he should be off the case. So much so, he beats the shit out of this kid. This is the point where, like, I'm liking this series, but that's a direction you didn't need to go. Because that was borderline preaching crap. Because I get exactly why they did it. They wanted to harken out to insert lives matter here. And also insert to police violence and all of that stuff. And I get why they did that. And it does work for the plot, because now the cops are pissed at Luke Cage. They have this viral video of him throwing cops around, and now a beat cop who did nothing to this superhero has now been murdered by him. So I get that the cops are incensed and the neighborhood is incensed because of this, and everybody's about ready to rip each other's heads off. But I also know, like, one of the reasons they went this direction was to call back to things like Black Lives Matter, whatever you want to use. All of those movements just piss me off. I have no problem saying that. But I get why they did that, and it worked with the plot. So things are elevating to a point where Mariah Dillard steps in. So I'm saying that's where it worked. Because a kid's been beaten half to death by a cop, Mariah Dillard is brought in and basically, encourages the mom to sue the department. All of this going along with Diamondback's plan of getting the public so afraid of Luke Cage that they have no problem arming the cops with Judas bullets. Okay? Now, keep in mind, the other problem with this is obvious. Originally, they were using regular bullets in this, but we've seen what a Judas bullet can do. And yeah, it doesn't do a whole lot to Luke Cage, but what does it do to a human body? Pretty nasty. So at that point, it gets a little bit more real for the viewer, because you know what that bullet can do. You know what a civilian is going to endure that isn't Luke Cage, that isn't Thor, that isn't the Hulk, if they get hit by that. That's not cool. And so this plan already kind of disgusts you as a viewer, but it gets the job done. So at that point, Mariah is encouraging the mother to sue the department. And you know what? I'd encourage her to sue the department too, because that was just a bad situation in so many different ways. But it basically is it's elevating the tension, and it gets even better because now Mariah Dillard is so pissed off at the department that she's now going to hold a public rally at Harlem's Paradise. This is the club that Cottonmouth owned and Mariah now owns. So she's going to hold this rally here, and that's really going to be where they try to get Harlem for these Judas bullets. In the meantime, though, the chief of the department goes to Detective Knight and says, "I don't care what you have to do." Or not so much that, but like I want you not focusing on this grand conspiracy that you're so worried about. You need to bring in Luke Cage right now. And Misty Knight is very much convinced that they don't have to worry about Luke in this case. They need to be worrying about this other guy that she's been able to find out about, named Willis Stryker, who just so happens to be the guy that shot, or that was going to execute her. So at that point, she's pursuing that, but she gets the pressure that she's been put under. She decides to defy it anyway. So this is why I'm liking Misty Knight as a character, because she still defies authority, because she doesn't want to be dictated by politics or anything like that. And so she goes to Harlem's Paradise anyway to go see if maybe Luke Cage makes an appearance or something like that. Now, I've elevated that. Now we need to go back to Luke's story. So Luke is recovering in the barn that they did the acid bath in. And in turn, he decides, since this is probably going to be the only time that Reva's hard drive is ever going to be unlocked, to go look into it. And we actually find out some very disturbing stuff. Like, at least disturbing for the viewer who's been on this journey with Luke. Because a good portion of them were also on the journey in Jessica Jones. And we know how powerful a character, how powerful a figure Reva is to Luke, simply because of the whole Jessica Jones story of her being Reva's murderer through being controlled by Kilgrave. So at that point, we all are kind of there with him. We all think Reva's a great person, and then we unlock the hard drive. We actually find out that she is just as much a scientist as, I believe his name was Bernstein, and that she'd been looking at Luke Cage as a possible candidate for this procedure that eventually gave him his powers for months, if not years, in prison. And this tears Luke up, because Reva is not the person that he thought she was. Bernstein kind of confirms that. She was very much objective oriented. She knew where she wanted to go, and she knew what she wanted to do, and always had kind of her own little sub agendas. So it leaves a lot of question for Reva on whether or not she ever loved Luke, whether or not she ever had any inclination for him other than being a lab rat. And I love the fact that they also try to emphasize with Bernstein that, oh, we were still doing something ethical because we were going to take time off their sentences and blah, blah, blah if they went into these experiments. It's still experimenting on human beings in a situation that they don't want to be in. That's why you go through a volunteer experience, as far as I'm concerned. But it's usually how these plots go. It's mad science. So at that point, we have a big questioning moment with Luke of he basically hates the woman that he now knows was Reva, but he loves the idea of Reva. He loves the hope that Reva gave to him, so to speak, and comes to the decision he needs to go back to Harlem. Originally, he was like, they have a bullet that can kill me. I should be running, but I need to go back. I need to go back and set things right, especially since he finds out another pit stop that they make on the way is that they go to Luke's former hometown, and he actually comes to the revelations that Willis or that Diamondback hints at in an earlier episode, that he is Luke's half-brother. So the way that it works is that Carl Lucas's father was the preacher the local preacher, and he was married, but he was also boning a secretary in the meantime. And his secretary gave birth, and she gave birth to Willis Stryker. And originally, I guess this was okay. I don't think it would be, but it was okay, because Reverend Lucas and his wife were having some issues conceiving. Until 2 years later when Luke was born. And then at that point, things got really bitter and really south really quick, which eventually led into, we actually find out the details a little bit more in the next episode, but we get a full-on background of Willis and the fact that he wasn't, like, he tried to be a good kid. He tried to get the respect of his father and never got it. And that's what eventually led him to the life that he now leads. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we get into the next episode. But then he comes to the realization that, yeah, he is his half-brother, and he is his brother's keeper, and he actually has to take care of this. This is his personal responsibility, and heads back to Harlem. Now, the reason I told the other story up until this point is because it all converges at Harlem's Paradise. Misty Knight is there to see the rally to make sure that it's being peaceful, but Diamondback is obviously there because they're going to make it more than that. It's going to be a way to get Judas bullets into cops' hands by basically making this out to be some kind of... I'm not sure what the original plan was because they had to adapt to it, mainly because Luke comes there. And he gets there right in time as Misty is being shot by Diamondback and gets her out of the crosshairs, but also creates a little bit of a scene. Enough so that Diamondback changes the plan to be a hostage situation. And that's pretty much like how episode 1 ends, is like they're in the middle of a firefight and Luke is trying to get Misty out of there while she is bleeding. She's been shot. And you're like, oh crap, how is Luke going to get out of this? So that's episode 10. Episode 11 basically is the hostage situation. Luke is able to get her down to a secret basement that was there since Prohibition days, but since he has no medical expertise, he's treating her as best as she can, but Misty's not doing good. Thankfully, though, Claire went with him, and so at that point he's like, I have somebody who can heal her, or who can help her, but she's with the other hostages. So it then becomes an interesting situation of told through 3 to 4 perspectives. I say 3 to 4 because one of them eventually melds into the other. That is of Luke, of Claire, of Diamondback, and of the police. And I'll go over them as best as I can. So Claire's is fairly simple. She's just trying to find a way to get back to Luke. And through meeting the one girl who said she was Cottonmouth's whore, but wasn't true. She works with her and eventually is able to get herself down to a prohibition basement to meet up with Luke and help out with Misty. 80% of Luke's story is trying to determine, if he leaves, Misty will die. And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be able to save her too. So we have him kind of go through these makeshift medical solutions to try and save her until Claire is actually able to meet up with him. And that actually ends up in a really good scene where she's like knocking on the wall to find this secret basement. And like the old horror movies, the way that Luke tells her where he is he punches a hole in the wall. That's usually something you'd see in a horror movie is like, boom, rah, drag him in there. And instead he's like, I'm here. So I like that concept. Then eventually Luke's story goes into, now that Claire can take care of Misty, I need to go take care of Diamondback. And so that's pretty much those 2 storylines. The police are constantly dealing with the fact that this is a hostage situation, that SWAT wants to go in and save the hostages, but the chief isn't going to let them do it. And eventually we get to see a familiar face because the former prosecutor, or the prosecutor from Daredevil season 2 on the Punisher situation, comes in and is basically kind of the liaison between the mayor's office and the chief. And he's also kind of the go-between that we find out that Mariah Dillard and the mayor are in secret talks to authorize the Judas bullets. And that they're going to start distributing them. And this obviously adds in a lot more tension and also gives a little bit more of a time for the DA, who was seen as very scummy in Daredevil season 2, to kind of redeem himself because he doesn't want these Judas bullets on the street because they will stay there. You will have people using Judas bullets from there on in. And it is a harsh reality that I thought was a nice addition to this concept, is that if you show it on the street, it will get put on the street. That's the way it's going to go. Sorry, it's almost like I'm talking too much and getting thirsty. So we have that story, and then finally the other storyline that we have is Diamondback, and it's Diamondback explaining, or not only handling this hostage situation and fighting with Shades, but also playing out the role that he's trying to do here, which is he's saying to everybody that he is Luke Cage and he has these hostages and he won't let them go until this and this and this demand is met. Just continuing to, stew the pot a little bit. But at the same time, he also knows that Luke is in the building, so he's also trying to stew that pot. And he actually puts on, I think it was on speakerphone, a discussion between him and the other politician that Mariah was dealing with, who is now a hostage, where he explains his life. He was always resentful of Luke, and eventually, they were the best of friends at one point until a car was stolen and they went on a joyride. And all of it got put on Willis. None of it got put on Luke. Which sent him to juvie, where he got, or somebody tried to shiv him 2 days in, and then he went to hard prison. So at that point, it's just showing he was at this point now, then he went down, and then he went further from there, and now he is Diamondback. He's not even Willis anymore. He's Diamondback. So you have these stories coming together, and really well, they did the pacing properly to be able to showcase when this situation is happening, this is how the other 2 stories are reacting to it. And we eventually get to the final scene in it where Luke is actually so pissed off at this point. They've actually killed off the politician, Damon Boone, I think is his name. They killed him off, showed that he was dead, and actually he used the super gauntlet to kill him. So it looked like Luke killed him. So at this point, Luke's like, F this, I've had enough. rips out the power cables, and now we're running on emergency power, kicks everybody's butt until he gets up to the main floor where all the hostages have been, and he's also let out the hostages and has his confrontation with Willis while Willis has a hostage. And Willis has a little bit of an upper hand here because he's got that sniper rifle again, and he's got one more Judas bullet left. If he hits Luke once, then we are back to square one on that situation, and things are only going to get worse from there. So we have that tension building moment where they talk and they realize that they're not going to reconcile at all. There's no way to turn Willis away from this path, and the shot is fired, and thankfully it misses. Like, that's the most tense moment there, is if he hits, this is a bad situation for Luke. Because at that point, we don't know if his skin is adapted to the Judas bullet, or if we're back to square one and they have to go back to the scientist again and have to deal with that issue all over. Because Bernstein still wants to experiment on him and still wants to further his own scientific goals. But shot is fired, SWAT goes in, and immediately we end the episode with an arrested Luke Cage telling everybody, "Get out of here. I will handle this. We will do this, or I have to do this my way." And that's how the episode ends. So now Luke Cage is in custody, building up for the last 2 episodes and the war that's probably going to ensue out in Harlem. My final thoughts on it. The tension is building so great, and it gives you enough time to be able to adjust to it. Aside from the one controversial moment, and I get why that was put in the plot, and I understand that. It's just still, I'm really of the opinion that when TV programs try to preach to me, it irritates me to no end, because at that point it's not even about what the plot of that episode or that show was anymore. It's about, you want to do this. This is why in a lot of cases I can't deal with a lot of current day shows unless it's like superheroes, where I know it'll be done, like for the most part, it'll be done properly. So like the CW DC universe does it really well. Netflix for the most part does. Marvel Netflix does it fairly well as also. So, I mean, aside from that controversial moment, I'm still loving the tension that's building, and I'm going to be very excited next week when I tackle the last 2 episodes and get my payoff for this season. So that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I, of course, will see you guys next week for the last 2 episodes of Luke Cage.